Welcome to Managing Love Intelligently. I'm Jason.
And I'm Stephen Ng, marriage and family therapist.
And today's episode is titled Holding a Relationship Loosely.
Ooh, yeah.
So
it's a simple phrase, but it really touches on a lot of really important points.
Yeah, simple but difficult to put into practice. So this is something that you've mentioned a few times, but we've never dove into it. And from what I've gathered from you is that the idea is that when you date, you hold the relationship loosely, which means you're not going to be like grabbing and pressuring and trying to make this the one, or you're trying
making a disgusting, ridiculous spectacle of yourself by being so emotionally needy. Yeah, that's part of it. And that's worthy of a discussion in and of itself. But there's more. There's more to it than that.
All right. Well, before we kick off the conversation and go full into it, if you have a question for Steve, you can visit stephening.com and fill out the contact form. At the end of each episode, Steve will answer a listener question, so stay tuned for that. And if the podcast helps you live a healthier and happier life, please help spread the word and share it with your friends and family.
And every once in a while, we get hate mail, usually from a neo-Nazi or some incel, so I just really appreciate those guys. If you could keep those coming in, that'd be great.
Yeah. You can send them to me or Steve. We love those ones.
They're very encouraging.
Mm-hmm. So where did this, to start with holding this relationship loosely, where did this idea come from for you?
Well, in this day and age, with conspiracy theories and ludicrous claims that windmills cause cancer and that kind of thing, I was reminded over and over again of how important it is, if we're going to be making good decisions, we need to be grounded in reality, right? So if you're not grounded in reality, well, as a direct downstream consequence, your decision-making is going to be highly flawed. And the reality is that of any individual crush or relationship that develops, only a very small minority of those are going to ever result in a successful, long-term, loving relationship. So that's one of the things. It's more about holding the outcome loosely instead of, with the irrational belief, a lot of people, well, all you need is love. And if we really love each other, we should stay together no matter what. Whether there's domestic violence or chronic substance abuse or whatever. And that's just crazy, right? So holding it loosely, as you pointed out, does free me emotionally to hold the relationship without desperately clinging to it. And I can hold the relationship, but I hold it loosely in the sense that, hey, if it doesn't work out, which would be like most relationships not working out, then I'm still going to be okay. I get to go on with my life, and so does she. And hopefully, I do believe everything happens for a reason, and there are going to be some wonderful lessons to be learned from this experience. And if I do follow a reasonable course of action and conduct my due diligence by performing an intentional interview, there's this delightful part of it, even meeting the wrong person. I get to know a new person, and that's always intriguing and interesting. And I don't waste months of my life, much less years of my life, spending time with the wrong person. I get to get in and get out. But holding it loosely does not mean superficially. It doesn't mean without care or without attention or without love. And that's why I say holding it loosely. You're still holding it, but you're just holding it without any firm expectation of it all working out. But I love her.
But how do you get there? I guess is it tied into the whole idea of creating a life worth living that we talk about? Is that,
I think that's
if you don't do that step, do you think that you're doomed?
If you have a life worth living, that is a big win right there. But also every change that we talk about in our lives starts with awareness. And if one can look in the mirror and honestly accept, I do have a history of being kind of needy. And I do. I've had that history. I think most people listening to this can admit to themselves, Yeah, there's been a time or two where I was embarrassingly needy and I had a really hard time letting go, whether it was all the way back into high school or sometime since then or multiple times. It really doesn't matter. It's not a strategy that ever works, where I'm grasping and clingy and, it's nobody finds that attractive. And so, although I suppose some predator might find that attractive because then they can exploit you and take advantage of you. So I start with this awareness. Yeah, I've done that. Then engage in what we've always referred to in these discussions as a practice of holding things loosely, reminding oneself on the regular. Yeah, I don't need to call her 3 times every day. I don't even need to be texting her 3 times a day. I can just, hold this somewhat loosely and enjoy the opportunities we have to get together. And if you are texting right now at 3 times a day or calling 3 times a day, don't worry about it. Sometimes that's the right number, but it's just not always the right answer. So if one is being adaptive and paying attention to the signals that we're each giving the other, you eventually, at least I eventually, come to the realization, aha, yet another of the thousands of women who have found me quite resistible. And I can let go in a similar, sort of parallel manner. And we can maybe safely go on to enjoy each other's company occasionally, or go on a date occasionally for recreational purposes, but not with the idea that we're each auditioning for a leading role in the other's epic romantic movie of their life.
So I want to talk about the text really quick. So what if you are starting to get to know somebody and say you text them, then you don't hear back for like 3 days, they text back, and then you text back, and then you want, like, how soon do you, like, how do you do that? Do you just hold it loosely, like you adapt to them, or like you'd say something about it?
Well, I had a client last week who had a girlfriend he was talking about a girlfriend who was really angry with him because he, to quote, she told me I should text her every day. Mm-hmm. And the minute, and then unquote, okay, so the minute any of us start hearing that kind of pressure, that controlling, that kind of a guilt trip, that there's some moral obligation to call the other person X number of times without the other person admitting, by the way, my phone does work both ways. I could have called you, but you should have called me. And I think that's where, we get into this kind of guessing. And I think guessing what the other person wants, guessing what the right number of times is, that, what was that Vince Vaughn movie that was so funny, where, they had all these rules about dating and when to call and how never to call them.
Swingers?
Yeah, that's exactly what it was. If you haven't seen that yet, if you're listening to this, please go ahead and take a look at it. It is very, very illuminating in terms of the stupidity of having really rigid rules and trying to play games as opposed to simply being yourself. Mm. Because part of being myself is admitting, I want somebody who's interested in me let's say on a scale of 1 to 10. I like somebody who's showing interest in me above a 5, or even at an 8. And I'm willing to give that kind of attention and love in return, but I'm not really interested in somebody who's kind of demonstrating I can take him or leave him sort of attitude.
Yeah.
So if that's what you're getting and that doesn't work for you, then to absolutely fade away, get a clue, mister.
How long do you give it though? Like you give it like a week or 2 weeks or a month or?
Well, my own strategy, and I say this to all you boys and girls out there in Radio Land, that there's no reason for any of us to be limited to one person we're dating. And I'm speaking of dating, not having sex with. So dating is different from intercourse, at least for me. Those are 2 separate stories. And if you're just dating, I don't see why anyone, male or female, can't date multiple people. So if my dance card is getting filled up with other women who are expressing more interest, and I'm spending more time with them and enjoying the heck out of it, I could maybe date her once every 2 weeks or whatever it is that she's cool with. And as long as it's fun, as long as it's, recreationally interesting, I could keep doing that. But to be so lonely and so needy that I have to have a number in my head, or I have to desperately return every call or every text, within the hour, or otherwise I'm really screwing things up. That's too much.
Yeah.
That's definitely, I think, what the rest of the world would call high maintenance.
But that person though, who's you're only hanging out with, say
you're just hanging out with one person, one date.
Well, no, say you're having multiple people, and one of them you're like really connecting with and having a fun time, and then the other one you hear from like once every 2 weeks, but you still go on dates with her. She would not be the contender though to be in the epic romance of your life, or
unless it developed. I mean, but not for me. That would not be enough. Maybe for somebody else that would be the perfect number, because that woman who I'm having so much fun with 3 times a week, or twice a week, maybe she's just really not doing it for me on some other level. Because that's why Edward O. Wilson says psychology is the last of the sciences that will be really fully developed, because there are just way too many variables compared to, say, physics or chemistry.
Yeah.
Even botany. Psychology has just got a lot of things going on, and there are a lot of different goals that we have in terms of getting our needs met. So what if I am dating somebody every, say 3 times a week, and she's a lot of fun, but she's dumb as a box of rocks, and the fun we're having is more like Three Stooges kind of fun. That's probably not going to work for me in terms of the kind of intellectual intimacy I'm looking for.
Yeah.
And vice versa. If I'm the one who's more like the Three Stooges, and she's looking for that, she may have fun with me going skiing or, rock climbing or whatever it is we do for fun. But that doesn't mean, oh yeah, I'm the guy. She wants to settle down with me. It's like, so we all have our own version of that because we're complicated. We have more than just one need. So dating frequently and having fun does not equal a successful future together. And the one I'm only dating once every other week, she may be the more intriguing, the more interesting, and perhaps, and I'm just saying maybe because it's a possibility, right? Intellectually speaking, she may be the one with whom I'm really connecting emotionally and intellectually on a far deeper level. And in fact, maybe we're only dating every 2 weeks because, something that's very understandable. She's caught up in finals and she's going to the university and working real hard, or in my case, her husband is still home all the time.
Yeah.
There's children, don't let your parents listen to this. So there's just reasons why we all might rush forward or pull back that have nothing to do with the other person.
Yeah. I think it's interesting. Like, I have a friend who's currently dating, and it's like she was saying, like a lot of women and maybe some guys too, they want to be in a relationship so badly that they won't address this stuff. They'll just take it, be like, that's who the person is.
Yeah, that's that crazy, I need a girlfriend or I need a boyfriend, instead of thinking rationally, I need the right boyfriend or the right girlfriend.
Yeah.
And even that, to say I need the right boyfriend or a girlfriend in my life, what that to me means I've already developed a life worth living, and I can slow my roll to just let it happen organically and naturally. I don't have to make anything happen. I can just savor the date by date, day by day pleasure of getting to know this person, because getting to know them is so utterly pleasant. And because I'm not going to be that needy like some losers out there, I'm also going to be able to not need to rush in terms of closing the sale or getting a commitment or even giving a commitment in order to get a commitment. Like I'm the one who brings up the commitment idea, even though she hasn't. I'm the one who stresses that, I really want her to be my girlfriend, and she hasn't brought up anything like that. And that's really part of that grasping and that neediness, instead of just being two grown-ups and just enjoying getting to know each other.
Yeah. It sounds so easy coming from your mouth. But some people don't even think that they deserve it, or they don't think that they could get what they want, or they don't know what they want. That's why I think that idea of the 30 dates comes in especially handy, because during all these dating experiences, you're learning what works for you, what doesn't work for you. And if you're grasping, and if you're not holding it loosely, you're going to hop into one of those relationships almost immediately, which is what my experience has been for myself and from other people that I know. It's like, they're like, okay, here's somebody paying attention to me in it. And then it's like me being like, to yourself, to be like, well, I'm a 7 or an 8 when it comes to, somebody communicating on a daily basis. Say that's the number. I think usually before this whole thing, I'd probably settle for a 2. Probably, and just be like, that's who she is, and not even knowing that, no, there's other women out there who can provide that more closer number than this other thing.
When you think about artificial intelligence and the large language models, when you think about Tesla and the number of millions of hours of driving data that goes into his attempts at full self-driving, you realize it's not a big deal to give yourself as a younger person the idea of maybe, okay, I'm going to try to date at least 30 individual people, and I will take full responsibility for who I pick. And I'm going to be learning as I go along, because none of these 30 are necessarily going to be the one. It's more of a learning process to see if I can get better at intimacy skills, better at assessing people for how they would work in my life, better at being a loving, kind person, and really just holding people loosely so I can appreciate them without referencing their value in terms of whether or not they work for me. Because I know this will come as a shock to all of us narcissists out there, but people actually have lives of their own separate from us, and they have value separate from us. And it kind of goes back to, I love art, and to go to the Louvre in Paris and see the Mona Lisa, I can appreciate that. But I don't need to bring it home to appreciate it. Even right now, just talking about it, I can hold it in my mind. And the same thing is true of all these wonderful people we might date. I don't need to take possession of them for me to appreciate them and enjoy them as human beings. And so what we're really doing is engaging in a similar to an AI solving a problem, only we're using a wet brain to figure out who would be ideally the kind of partner I'm looking for. And when you get to number 10 or number 15 out of 30, you're already probably going to be thinking, okay, yeah, I need this, but not that. Or I really need more of this other thing, more intelligent conversation, or I need a partner with a different kind of a career because I want somebody who's more available, than say a medical student doing his residency, who I was just reading about today, a poor young man who committed suicide. He was working 80 hours a week every week.
Jeez. And they work those medical students to death, I feel like. Yeah,
I think it's so unsustainable and so utterly unhealthy. And not just in terms of, mental health, but physical health, of course. And we all need to be aware of that, because I'd like to think everybody listening to this is in it for the long haul. And otherwise, we're going to be one of those individuals who burn the candle at both ends, and we burn out in half the time. And I don't think, for me, that's not really what I'm looking for.
Yeah. I have a question for you. How long?
So many questions.
How long would you say that somebody could be in a dating phase with somebody?
Well, I was in a dating phase. Okay, there are a couple of answers. One is if immediately when you meet someone, generally, at least most men I know, size women up into, oh yeah, she's just a recreational potential partner, or this is something serious. I really need to explore this more deeply.
Yeah.
And strangely, I will say, I think sometimes the recreational partners last longer. The reason being is they last as long as it's fun.
Yeah.
and by fun, I don't mean necessarily sexual fun, or that could be a part of it. But the whole point of going on a date, really, the first goal is for us to have a good time. If going on a date is like going to a therapy session every time, and it's like grim, and we're pulling things out of each other, and we're really wrestling over how to simply be with each other, that's not fun. But if I'm with somebody I'm really serious about, I would argue now it's got to be fun, but it's also got to be that other thing that I'm looking for, which is a truly meaningful connection that would be sustainable. And that's going to last, I think, right up until I meet that deal breaker. And by deal breaker, I mean that whether it's a universal deal breaker or an individual deal breaker, that information that says, sorry, Steve, not for you. This one is not yours. And because for me, for example, and it's a silly thing in some ways, because I don't think it has any moral value, any intellectual value or spiritual value, but I just don't want to ever live with a smoker.
Yeah.
And so if I met a woman who was perfect in every way, and I really mean that, perfect in every way, but on our 5th date, I find out that she's a smoker, yeah, I'm out.
Well, you got some self-respect or whatever you want to call that, or high,
Actually, it's humility, because I know my limits.
Yeah.
And I know that I'm gonna turn into something I don't like. I'm gonna be rolling my eyes when she lights up a cigarette.
Yeah.
I'm gonna be pressuring her. Do you have to smoke in the car? Can't you smoke outside?
Yeah.
Can't you do this? Can't you just wait? And I don't want to be the cigarette hall monitor. I really want people to just be free to be themselves. And I do know really great guys who would have no trouble with a woman who is a cigarette smoker.
Yeah.
Some of them smoke, some of them don't smoke. But for them, it's a non-issue. I realize that in me, this is a bit of a weakness, right? It's kind of I'm maxing out the end of my tolerance, and I just can't do it. I wish I could. I wish I was a better person, but I'm just the horrible human being that I am.
Well, I like that you say that, because it does help me, because when I hear you say that, I'm like, oh, there's some things in myself that I'm the similar way.
Where you have limits and you can't really handle that.
Yeah. And before I would kind of be hard on myself about it, be like, I'm the problem. I'm, the issue, and take it on myself. But just to be like, no, that's just how I am. And if somebody doesn't accept it, then what are you going to do?
Right.
Except.
Well, I mean, it's kind of a big deal when you talk. I mean, we've talked about this before, you and I, but imagine meet the perfect woman, perfect in every way. And she loves music just as much as you love music. But the only kind of music she really loves is polka.
Yeah.
And she plays it for hours every day, and at her own apartment. And every time you get in the car, it's polka this and polka that. And she's a big fan of Lawrence Welk, and it just doesn't ever stop.
Yeah.
I think that would, for me, be like the proverbial Chinese water torture. And I don't care how perfect she is. I just couldn't do that.
Yeah.
I could tolerate an occasional polka, but... And it would be the same with a lot of different kinds of music, like death metal or something like that. But
yeah,
I'm the same way. I like what I like, and I know my taste in music would deservedly earn me a lot of eye rolling from other people. And it's the same way with so many of our personal traits that mean a lot to us. The way you decorate your apartment, or the way you like to entertain yourself, the kind of movies you like. There's just so many things. And I found as I get older, and I am really old, that I become more tolerant and I become more loving, but I'm also more humble, and I'm less rigid about my own limitations.
Yeah.
So I have a lot more self-acceptance too.
So you want to let people be themselves and you want them to let you be yourself. That's like the ideal situation here.
Right. But
And
what
showing
if
up that way.
her being herself is beyond my tolerance level? Well, then I have to admit, that I've got my limits and I run up the white flag.
And that's the holding it loosely and the outcome.
Yeah. And then I'd refer her to you.
Yeah.
Because you might be down for that, that cigar smoking, polka dancing, crazy lady.
It's kind of how I roll these days.
Well, you're from Chicago. I figured it'd be okay.
So what if you're dating for like 3 years and you could still say that's a long enough time? Like, don't you think eventually that it becomes like where somebody wants commitment at some point? I feel like that's like a big ender for some people where they're going along having a good time, and somebody drops the bomb like, oh, I want to take it to the next level. I want to be exclusive, where you're not hanging out with Jenny every other 2 weeks or any of your other people. Like, what about those situations?
This came up actually in my office last week because somebody brought up the question in a group, how long does the intentional interview last? And I threw up, as any good therapist would, I refused to answer the question, turned it back on the group. And one guy said in his experience, he thought it would take years to really qualify somebody in terms of getting to know who they were. And he was speaking specifically in terms of understanding who they were sexually.
Yeah.
And isn't necessarily a matter of, can she like Gumby be turned into a pretzel, all these different positions or anything, but more about understanding her values, her beliefs, her self-image. Does she really hate the way she looks? Is she self-conscious every time you two exchange a kiss or you say something about what she's wearing? And there are those people who really can't receive love in that way when you say, oh, God, you look great tonight, or vice versa, some guy being told he looks great. When he doesn't really buy into that, it's, it takes a minute even for a very talented therapist to discern that this person, they may superficially be making the right noises, but they really don't appreciate that kind of remark, because you're at the end of the moment, you're drawing attention to their physicality and maybe they don't like that.
Yeah.
So it takes however long it takes, but I can guarantee it doesn't take 3 months. It takes longer than that because it takes us longer than that to really get to know somebody. And I think the same is true. If you think about it in terms of financial commitments, would you or I go into a business partnership where you push, like in a poker game, all your financial chips into the middle of the table?
If it's a good pitch.
Right, yeah.
Then I'm all in.
On this one person who you really don't know that well, I would say that would be very foolish. And that you would really want to make more judicious, low-risk commitments little by little. So for me, the relationship I'm currently in, which is in its 31st year, I would say, well, we spent a year dating long distance, a year locally dating. And what was really great about it for both of us is we were holding it loosely in the sense of no one was pressuring anyone for a commitment, but we were enjoying each and every time we did get together. And because it was so enjoyable, we didn't feel any psychological pressure to make a commitment in order to get more of the other person.
Yeah. So you were both dating other people.
Funny thing, we weren't.
Oh, really?
And the reason
during the long and the long distance and the other distance?
During the long distance, I probably was here and there, but not much. And I'll tell you why. It was so freaking enjoyable. And back then I was paying it was so long ago. Children, there was a thing called long distance charges on your telephone. So I'm paying for all this long distance telephone conversation, but it was justifiable in my own mind because I would come home from a late night at the office. I'd be on the phone easily for 2 hours, more often for 4 hours.
Wow.
And that was our date. And so, I wasn't paying for her dinner or her drinks or movie tickets or anything like that. was just paying the damn phone bill.
So you two with phone conversations were like in 8 or 9, or
it was just,
as far as the spectrum goes, you both.
It's not like we preferred phone conversations, but because we lived 1,000 miles apart, phone conversations were really the only way of connecting that felt real. I mean, we did write letters back and forth too, and real letters that are written on a wood product called paper, with this liquid stuff that comes out of pens called ink. We actually were writing letters, but the phone was really a lifeline because with that voice in your ear, it really felt like she was there in the room.
Yeah.
So I would be in a late night setting in my kitchen, cooking dinner over the stove, and she would be relaxing because she'd already put her son to bed. And we would be going on and on, getting to know each other. And it was really enjoyable. And then when she did move to a local area where we could see each other a lot more easily, we found ourselves, again, just savoring the pleasure of getting to know this person incrementally. You know, it's like when you're opening a bottle of really great wine, or you're sitting down at some amazing dinner, you don't just start guzzling the wine down as fast as you can, or shoveling the food into your mouth as quickly as possible. You know, it's not like we're kids anymore and we're trying to get the all-you-can-eat special and stuff our bellies before our head knows we're full. So it was really a treat to just savor getting to know this other person. And it was the opposite of that extreme neediness. I mean, both of us were enjoying the heck. We were maxed out on enjoyment, but we were at the same time holding it loosely. Were
you conscious of that? Like, did you know that you were doing that? Did she know you were doing that? Or is it just...
I think we both did. And because I talked about it, and we both commented and had noticed that because we lived 1,000 miles away and we had never met personally, that it was kind of a crazy situation.
Yeah.
And so the odds of it working out, we both roll our eyes, that the odds of it, going forward. She was engaged to marry somebody else when I met her. And we were just, at first it was just little business conversations, and then they got longer and longer. And then, at some point she broke up with her boyfriend, her fiance. And it was never because I pressured her or I was trying to get her into my clutches.
You were just being yourself, and you drew her in.
Yeah, well, it's what they call an AA attraction rather than promotion. That's what they say about the program. This is a program of attraction rather than promotion. So I didn't need to promote myself and make myself look better than I am. In fact, how crazy would that be to do that with somebody 1,000 miles away? Because what's the end game? She finds out, I really don't like craft fairs. So I made it really clear that, I felt the freedom, and I know she did as well, because we were holding it loosely. It was so much easier to be honest, because if you know me, I have a thing about craft fairs. I just don't like them at all.
I don't like them either.
Okay. I think it's mostly a guy thing. I think most guys don't like craft fairs, but a lot of guys don't admit that because they're still trying to woo her by being somebody other than who they really are.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'd love to go to craft fairs.
Well, I think that's what most people are doing, but you were being completely honest, you and her, because you were so far away and you're like, I got nothing to lose here.
Right. And it's never going to work out anyway. So I would just, I hate this kind of music. I love that kind of music, or I hate this kind of food, or, I never work out, or whatever the thing is that normally you would catch me posturing perhaps, to try to look better than I was. I just felt so free. And I know that it was a somewhat artificial situation because of the phone relationship. But I learned that that's what I was going to do from then on as well. If it had not worked out with her, I was sold, because this was the way, as the Mandalorians say.
So you were sold on the idea of being that open and that honest with whoever it is you're dating, and if they take it or leave it.
Right. So if, some woman told me she didn't like something I really thought was important or I really liked, I was really okay with that. What I was really focused on was, how did she feel about me?
Yeah.
Was she able to enjoy me? Because I don't need women to like every book I like or to enjoy every movie I enjoy. We have to have a little common ground, right? But we don't need so much common ground that you could bury us in it.
Yeah.
So, it's meant, again, to be fun. And part of the fun is the differences between us. Just as two, at least in heterosexual relationships, the genitalia are different. Again, children, don't let your parents hear this. But but there's a lot of fun that can occur when you have two different sets of genitals.
Yes.
And the same way with all of your other interests in life. It doesn't have to be the same. As long as you have some common ground.
Yeah. So you did one long distance, 1 year.
And then the same relationship for another year.
Face to face.
Locally, yeah. So think globally, date locally.
That's good. I like that. And then from there, on the third year, then you became exclusive. But you didn't rush into getting married though. And that was a whole nother step.
Oh yeah. That was another 9 years.
So were you, during that phase of the exclusivity, were you still doing that intentional interview and getting to know her?
I still am to this day.
You're still holding it loosely?
Well, I'm still doing an intentional interview, but the big surprise is sometimes there's the big reveal that got buried in the early years. And then you walk into the kitchen and your partner's snorting a line of Coke off the countertop.
Yeah.
And that's not going to work for me.
Yeah.
And there's going to be a confrontation. And if this problem isn't resolved, we don't get to be together. So there's certain things like, it's not unusual for somebody in their 60s or their 50s to develop a new behavior that they never had before for whatever reason, or an old habit becomes a pernicious one. They used to gamble for fun and within their limits, but now they're like gambling more and more. And that's never going to have a happy ending unless they stop. And so what I don't want to do is be that control freak who says, you must stop. And then I become the police monitoring their compliance with the new directive from headquarters. I don't want to be that guy.
Yeah.
So I'd rather, and I hope everybody can hear this one, I'd rather find somebody I like just the way they are and enjoy the pleasure of their company and have some trust in the universe that as they grow and evolve as a human being, it will be in a healthy direction.
Yeah.
And I think that requires some level of life experience and sophistication. So I'd like to think that anybody listening to this would be dating somebody who already knows they don't want to be a drug addict, who already knows they don't really want to have any compulsive behavior in their life, and who's already comfortable with receiving love in what is a relatively normative way, like saying I love you, and they feel loved, and or giving them a hug and they feel loved, or giving them a little present and they feel loved. There are people in our society who really struggle with all of that, and that's not what I'm looking for. Those people need to be looking for me.
Yeah.
As a therapist or some other therapist who could help them work through that. But that's, when we're qualifying people, we want to find grownups who are grownups on the inside as well as looking grown up on the outside.
But you need to do that work for yourself too, to even like know those things that you want. Or
absolutely. Yeah.
Some people I feel like don't even know. I know that I didn't know a lot of things.
Well, I didn't know hardly anything. I just cringe when I think about the young man I once was who got married at age 20. And it's like, it's almost unthinkable in today's day and age, because the average age of first marriages is I think 30 right now, or close to it. Whereas in that time in which I was getting married, 20 wasn't unusual.
Yeah.
But it sure was not a good idea. Not because 20-year-olds couldn't do that, but because gaining the knowledge took me all those additional years, the knowledge that I needed. And sadly, we don't really offer a terrific sex education in our society that would include mate selection and understanding why certain people are incapable of being in loving relationships. I never got any of that except through trial and error and the actual doing of it, along with a lot of pain. So I would never forget those lessons.
Yeah. So then during that exclusive phase, were you pressured at all to get married, or were you just not even thinking about that? Or were you just like,
no, my
having
partner
fun?
never even once pressured me. And I think part of that, to be fair to everybody who's listening to this, is to disclose that she had had one epic failure of a marriage before, and I had had one epic failure of a marriage. So we already had it clearly established in our thinking that marriage by itself is not the solution to all of our problems. And instead, for both of us, marriage was an option. And as an option, it was one small step out of thousands of steps toward commitment. So instead of seeing commitment as a binary, you're either committed or you're not.
Yeah.
We saw it more as a continuum, starting with the commitments we each have as adults to take care of ourselves, and then going on to commitments to treat the other person respectfully, and then commitments to perform our due diligence and really get to know the other person, and a commitment to maintain self-care by, getting a job and having employment and being financially stable. Oh, and developing our own set of friends, each of us individually. So there's a lot of commitment going on.
Yeah.
And years of observation, but by the time I popped the question, which is kind of a funny story how that all happened, but by the time I told her that I wanted to get married, it was really just a small step out of thousands of other steps.
Yeah.
So I think a far bigger step that took a lot more courage on her part, and none on my part, was for her to move to this area, where I'm living. I mean, it was convenient in some ways because she was at a juncture in her life where, it wasn't like she was giving up a house or even a job, because she was in a transition point in her life. But still, I think it's a big commitment, especially when you have a child. She had a 3-year-old in her life, and it took a lot of courage for her. But she has explained to me that she would never have forgiven herself for not doing that, because she would have always wondered what would have happened if. So I think it's silly for all of us to, in the 21st century, to limit ourselves just to the people within, say, 50 miles of where we live.
Yeah.
That's just kind of crazy.
For sure. And what about people who do want to put pressure on the other person? Like if the woman wants to pressure the guy to get married, or the guy wants to pressure the woman to get married, and they're kind of like, is that their own neediness coming up?
Absolutely. So in their efforts to establish the relationship, they've laid the seeds for the relationship's destruction, because the relationship has not, was that too dramatic?
The destruction. Yeah, I know. It's
because it's the marriage is not the relationship. The marriage is a celebration of what you've already built. And it's a public announcement to the world that, hey, we are a team. We are a couple, and we are partners in this life. But for a lot of people, it's the end goal. And I remember going to a wedding fair. I don't even know if they do those anymore, but this wedding fair was all about all the gear one could buy, and dresses and all the different services one could obtain, from florists to videography and all the rest.
Yeah.
And it filled up a local convention center with all these vendors in there. And the banner over the doorway going in said, "Her special day."
Yeah.
And I get that. I understand that for a lot of people, that's the big day, and it's super meaningful. But I think that's a vestige of a bygone era, going back to the celebration or the establishment of the code of virginity, her special day where she's wearing white, symbolizing purity, going down the aisle, and her father literally giving her away in this elaborate ceremony of it may be romantic to a lot of people, and it really may be traditional and feel comforting. And I get that, but it's also fairly patriarchal and sexist. Mm-hmm. And it's really not about partnership so much. And making the marriage into nothing more than her special day. Well, she deserves that. I thought I owed it to her. Those kinds of things. Mm-hmm. No, I don't think that's really adaptive. I think it's far more adaptive for two adults to focus on who are we when we're together? Mm-hmm. Are we getting our needs met? Am I really happy with you? Not that you're making me happy, but that I'm really happy to be with you, and I'm really happy to be your partner. And then if you've got all that, marriage becomes something of an afterthought where it can still be wonderful, and you can put on the big expensive one or do the quiet one with a few friends and family, but it's not nearly the blockbuster event mm-hmm. that it is for people who really don't have that groundwork established, that foundation of intimacy and connectedness. Yeah. So I would never marry a woman who wasn't my true partner already. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Partnership doesn't start with the marriage. And if there was already a partnership, well, the value is in my partner and mm-hmm. the partnership itself. It's not in this ceremony that, sort of announces it to the world.
Well, I think people got it reversed.
Yeah. Well, yes. Yes, I think so. And, this is hard. I think if you're a little girl growing up on, romantic movies, Disney princesses and that kind of thing, it would be easy to lose sight of that. But I think modern women, and I'm hoping more and more modern men, get the idea though that the goal is to build a life together that's truly enjoyable, that's worth having. Mm. And one day's event is not really going to do that. Yeah. It's more like a practice, like the Buddhists talk about. It's a mm-hmm. practice of being together. And how are we together? Yeah. You can have two wonderful people, and even you and I with friends in our lives. There can be a wonderful guy in our lives, but he consistently brings out the worst in me for whatever reason, because it's like a chemistry experiment in the lab. And there are romantic partners who bring out the worst in us, and we bring out the worst in them, sorry to say. Yeah. And that's part of the evaluation, right? I need to figure that out. Are we mutually good for each other? Mm-hmm. So it's a little bit complicated, but I don't think any of the things you and I talk about in these podcasts are so complicated that the average person couldn't see it and figure it out and agree.
I think the ideas are simple, but putting in the practice is the difficult part. It's like the Buddhist saying, be mm-hmm. present. It's like
so easy.
Yeah, sure. But then to do that is hard.
It is really hard, yeah.
So you want people with all this saying, hold it loosely, don't worry about the outcome, 30 dates, create a life. You want people to you're pushing people for, not pushing them, but you want them to go on a journey.
Yeah, and it's a wonderful journey. It's especially once one has developed a life worth living, because mm-hmm. then I'm not that knuckle-biting, needy man with nothing but a child on the inside.
And we learned that never works.
It doesn't work in terms of building what you're trying to build.
Yeah, so that's the thing that we talked about, acknowledging that.
Right.
Okay.
So if you can get past that, and I think that's an individual spiritual journey, right? Mm-hmm. To become comfortable with one's own company and to be okay with that. I remember meeting a wonderful friend. We were friends for many years till he passed. And he confided in me that he hated being single. We were both divorced. He hated it because, Steve, he said, I just can't be alone. Mm-hmm. And since he told me that, I've had numerous men say that to me. And for any woman who hears a man saying that, or who suspects that the man actually feels that way, I would say run for the hills. Yeah. because he's you pulled him out of the oven when he's only half baked. And put him back in there, let him have some more time in life, and maybe he'll be done. But this guy was, 48, 50 when he told me that. So was he ever able to get comfortable with his own life? I don't think he ever was. I think he died really miserably all alone.
Man, that's a shame.
Yeah, it is. It's sad.
So, but though you wanna bake yourself till you're baked and good and cooked, and then you could be yourself, and then you could go out and you could meet men or women or whoever you're dating, and you don't have to put on an act. You don't have to pretend to be somebody you're not. Hold it loosely and have a good time.
Yeah, and like you say, I make it sound easy, I suppose, but it certainly wasn't easy for me to learn this. But these are only skills that can be learned with practice. And so if you fail here and there, or you have a couple of bad dating experiences, you get to go, all of us get to go home and debrief, or maybe even talk about it with the person we're dating. Last week when we went out, this happened. I want you to know, I just don't feel comfortable with that. And to talk it through to where you have your feelings instead of your feelings having you. You have your own goals, instead of being driven along mindlessly like some dumb ox being, herded to market, have your throat slit, just to be able to kind of be captain of your own ship. And I say that to men and women. I think it's important for all of us to figure this out so that we can ultimately be happy. Because when I'm choosing out of my own neediness, that is not a formula for ultimate happiness.
Yeah.
Because I'm going to get what I settle for. And then once I've settled for it, all of a sudden it's no longer satiating. It's no longer satisfying.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm being somebody who's in it and doing it and practicing it. Like, I think that's what it is. Sometimes maybe you don't do great, but it's in there. It's like once the information gets in there and you actually let it like seep into your brain, maybe you don't act on it immediately right away, or maybe you're not an expert at it, but you just keep going and going, and it's always going to be in the back of your mind. So,
it's funny. I work with a lot of groups, usually 100 men per week in different groups. And in every group, there's always a handful of guys who really understand what you and I are talking about and start applying it to their lives mindfully. And there's another group of men who have never applied it to their lives despite being in the group for years.
Wow.
And then there's a middle group who kind of sort of, have an idea here and there, maybe do a little bit of changing. And I guess we all get to settle for whichever group we feel most comfortable with. And for me, I like that first group a lot because I really like listening to a woman who's really figuring herself out and who's, mindfully building a life worth living. I think that's really intriguing to me, but that's me. That's what I like.
Yeah.
There are other people who are perhaps at the shallow end of the gene pool who really don't care. They want a warm body with a pulse, and they're good.
Yeah.
So, we all get to settle for whatever we want. And that includes our children and our friends. We might say, don't do it. I'm warning you, this is not going to work. I would say a better line might be, hey, you know what? Even if you're making a mistake, it's okay because there's a remedy. If one day you wake up and you realize, oops, I made a big mistake, there's this thing called divorce, and you can do that. It's not like this is a mistake from which you can never recover. And sometimes we're so pig-headed, and I know I was incredibly stubborn, that was the option I chose out of, what was it, Behind Curtain C. That was the one I chose. Yeah, I want the miserable marriage with the divorce.
All right, well, hold it loosely and have fun.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. And you'll have a lot more fun if you do hold all these things loosely. I'm Steve Inning. Thanks for listening.
Great. And to wrap up, we have a listener question. And if you have a question for Steve, you could visit stevening.com and fill out the contact form. This week's question is, in a previous podcast episode, I remember you saying that a couple can have spiritual intimacy even if they have different religions or even if one of them isn't a believer. In our case, I don't go to church, but I do believe in God, and my boyfriend is an atheist and thinks all religions are man-made nonsense and irrational. What is your advice for us so we could get to a place of spiritual intimacy instead of focusing on how wrong we think each other are?
Well, one of my favorite words is confrontation, and by that I don't mean a violent confrontation or an angry confrontation, but just having the courage to bring something up. So if I were the woman in this case, I would say, hey, you know how your spiritual beliefs have no room in it for any kind of charity toward religion. You just think it's all a big stupid thing. Yeah. To say, yeah, that's not working for me. I need a little mercy here and a little understanding and compassion, because I find that way of thinking and living to be very valuable in a lot of ways. And when you're dismissive of that part of my life experience, it feels really like you just don't get me. And whether or not I ultimately end up continuing through my life to believe or not, I still want to be honored and respected for my place along the journey and the way I can honor and respect you for where you are. I don't expect you to believe, because that's not something you can control. Only, at least in my worldview, only God can give you faith. So if you don't have faith, I don't blame you for that. That's on God. But likewise, I need you to have the same kind of offhanded openness toward me. And, you know, what I learned in church in a given day, for me, needs to be a justifiable part of our debriefing on how I spent my Sunday, or, you know, what I'm getting out of that book I'm reading, or, you know, what is it I really like to pray about? You know, that's part of knowing me. And if you degrade that part of my life, you're degrading me. So that would be my confrontation.
All right.
And the other person who can't, salute that flag as it goes up the pole, I think that would be the beginning of the end.
Yeah. All right. And they're only in a coupled relationship, so boyfriend, so
yeah,
married,
so it's not too late.
Run,
run.
They don't have to go with the divorce. They could just go with a breakup.
It's like high school. Yeah, you just break up.
Simple.
Give back the Christopher and move on.
Great. Well, thank you for the question. And yeah, thanks for chatting about that. It's something that I've been thinking a lot about as far as like holding a relationship loosely, as far as like in regards to the outcome, and just seeing the benefits of it play out for me and also in my friends' lives has been really cool to see that kind of work.
Right. Thanks.
All right. Well, we'll catch you all next time.